If you go to St Matthew's Gospel, St Matthew, and read the Sermon on the Mount, it's possible to duck the full meaning of the Beatitudes. It's not easy, but it's possible. Blessed are the pure, blessed are the poor in spirit, the pure in heart, the gentle, the peacemakers, etc. And you can say to yourself, well, I'm trying to be gentle this week. I'm trying to make peace with my neighbour, etc. And you can just about let yourself off the hook. But today in St Luke's Gospel we hear the Sermon on the Plain, where Jesus' teaching is even more direct. And look, there's no contradiction here between the two Gospels. Jesus is often reframing his teaching for different circumstances. And here in St Luke, there is a blessing on the poor. How blessed, happy, fortunate you are, you who are poor. Yours is the kingdom of heaven. But here in St Luke, Jesus adds the famous woes. Woe! Alas, for you who are rich. You are having your consolation now. Alas, for you who have your fill now. You shall go hungry. Alas, for you who laugh now. You shall weep and mourn. There's no avoiding the hard teaching here. It's not possible to spiritualize it. Woe to you who are rich. And it's part of a theme that runs through the whole Bible, and especially in St Luke. How God turns the tables of the world upside down. He confounds our expectations. This is about an inversion of our social hierarchies. It's taught, first of all, by whom? By the Virgin Mary. In the Magnificat, her song of praise at the beginning of the Gospel, she proclaims a God who looks on her lowliness, her poverty, who casts the mighty from their thrones and raises up the lowly, who fills the starving with good things and sends the rich away empty. And we heard just a few weeks ago that Jesus was anointed specifically to bring good news to the poor. He is not the Christ, the anointed one, in order to bring good news to the rich. How do you respond to this good news? Well, it probably depends on your social situation and that of your family. If you are poor, hungry, homeless, destitute, abandoned, alone, this is the joy of knowing that Jesus is on your side, that he hasn't forgotten you, and that his desire is to bring you to a better place, and that his kingdom is being built, maybe slowly, but that it is, and that he's calling all Christians, the whole church, to focus on you and your needs. In the language of Catholic social teaching, this is called the preferential option for the poor. It's okay to say that yes, in principle, God loves all people equally, which he does, but in practice, in this fallen world and in the life of Jesus, he loves the poor with special concern and extra time and extra energy. But if you're rich and you hear this gospel today, if you're simply content, maybe complacent, if you, in the language of the gospel, had your fill of breakfast this morning or supper last night, if you are just comfortably middle class, if simply you are not destitute, which is most of us, this teaching should shake and challenge us to the core. There is lots to say, and of course there is lots of nuance in a Bible that contains hundreds of thousands of words of teaching. But this teaching is unavoidable. Woe to you who are rich, the danger of riches for any and every Christian. I'm not just speaking to you, I'm speaking to myself. Just for the record, a little bit of theology here, that diocesan priests, like myself, sometimes called secular priests, we do not take religious vows of poverty. My 3 vows, my 3 promises, are lifelong celibacy, obedience to my bishop, and to pray the divine office for the sake of the church and the world every day, but not a vow of poverty. I have a bank account, a car in an underground car park at Euston. I have vouchers to Everyman Cinema in my wallet, an annual pass to the local gym and to Tate Gallery. I have a guitar in my office, it's mine, and a saxophone upstairs in my flat, it's mine. I'm not poor. The gospel is a challenge to me as much as to you. And in fact, I'm called as a secular priest in the teaching and the canon law of the church to live a life of simplicity. St. Paul VI, Pope Paul VI, pushed this even further. He said to us diocesan priests, no, you haven't taken a vow of poverty, but you must live a life that matches the poorest person within your geographical parish. That's the measure. To share the lives of the poorest so that no one feels alienated from you. Isn't it beautiful? I guess that means I've got to live in Ramsey Hall and eat from the Hare Krishna stalls at LSE and UCL. We need some help in thinking through all this. There is the blunt teaching of the gospel, but we need some reflection on it together. So let me just put this under 3 headings. The first heading is the spiritual danger of riches, which is true for every Christian. It's easy for us to become greedy, selfish, attached, even addicted to good things. This is acquisitiveness. It can eat at our soul. The more we acquire, paradoxically, the harder it is to discern. We think, oh, I'll get a bit more, then I'll let go of it. Well, no, you're trapped. It blinds us. We always justify the next thing, the next step, the next move, the next job, the next house. The parable in St. Luke, remember, of the farmer, the businessman, who builds bigger and bigger barns. It never stops to store his goods as they grow and grow, only to have it all taken away in a flash on the day of his death. The spiritual danger to our souls. And if you like, this is a selfish reason not to be rich. We can be so much more free and find peace with God and our neighbour, and yes, to grow in virtue for ourselves as well as for others. But second, let's not just spiritualise this question as if it's all about my holiness and virtue and inner peace. The second danger of riches is its effects on others. The social effects of my riches. Now, it's not true that all riches, all wealth are won by unjust means. The church is not against wealth creation, business, capital, innovation. Not at all. How important these things are in a free society. And without going into deep economic and political disputes, how we recognise the place of the market economy when it is just and equitable. But an honest recognition that much wealth is created in unjust or exploitative ways, and that the more the wealth, the more the temptation to injustice. Economic injustice, ecological injustice, inequitable supply chains, the evil of human trafficking, and all the evils that can follow from a market that has no limits and no constraints. And even if there is no evil in the acquisition of our goods, there's always an opportunity cost, to use the economic jargon. The fact that I did this, worked in this way, invested in this way, means I chose not to work in another way, to give time to something else, to the alternative. What was the alternative? Might it have been better than the riches I chose? Remember the rich man who ignored Lazarus in the parable and went to Sheol. He had perhaps not done anything actively wrong in his business, but by choosing not to help Lazarus at his gate when he could have done, this was a great evil. Never forget the opportunity costs. In Catholic social teaching, there are 2 principles that we hold together here. the right to private property, which is actually a defence of the dignity of the human person. If you have nothing and I can take anything off you when I want, who are you as a person? How do we defend your dignity? As Christians, we are not communists. But, as well as the right to private property, there is what's called the universal destination of goods. That we have no ultimate right to goods, because goods and property are ultimately for the good of all. A call to generosity, to avoid acquisitiveness. And this is what gives governments the rights within reason to create laws and to tax for the common good, etc. These two principles, and we need to hold them together in our Christian teaching, but also in our own individual lives. The right to private property and the universal destination of goods. The third aspect of Christian teaching, biblical teaching, is not just about rights and duties and dangers. It's about the call to generosity. It's not just that I need to be more just, I do, but it's that I'm called to be more generous, to go beyond the simple duties of being human or being a citizen or not doing evil. The call to generosity. So to take this away as a positive gift and not just a scary rebuke. You see this in the disciples who left everything to follow Jesus. You see it in Zacchaeus, a rich man in Jericho who had been very unjust, who repented of his sin, converted, and gave half his property to the poor. 50%. You see this in the tradition of not myself as a secular priest, but religious who do take vows of voluntary poverty. St. Anthony of the Desert, St. Francis of Assisi, our own religious sisters and brothers who work here in the chaplaincy. Not all are called to voluntary poverty, but we should all be inspired by it. The biblical tradition of tithing, of giving 10% of our income to the needs of others, to the church, to the poor. How strong this is still in many Christian cultures, especially in Protestant and Pentecostal churches. How strong it is in North American Catholicism, because they've been so influenced in such a good way by their Protestant brothers and sisters. I've got a friend in America who tithes. He runs a business from the beginning of his working life and his business life, which is doing well. He's promised to give 10% to the needs of the church and the poor. And that's 10% before tax. It's not 50% like Zacchaeus, but it's a significant amount. And it's an amazing sign of his generosity as a Christian. What does that mean for you? Well, let me finish with a story about riches and wealth and tithing, etc., that began with students. Have some of you heard of the effective altruism movement? Anyone? Okay, well, I'm really sad about that, because, well, I'm telling you now, you should know it. Go and read about it. Yeah? This started with some university students like yourselves in Oxford. They had a desire, with the zeal of youth, thank God, to be generous and to think, God, you've given me all these gifts. I'm not saying they're religious, that was my phrase. We have been given all these gifts. Look at the gifts of education, intelligence and money. How can we share this and be generous? And they were thinking, yes, we can give some of our money away now. Great, and really great. Here am I as a student, I've got some money in the bank, I've got some change in my pocket, what can I do with it? But would it be better to think really intelligently and creatively about where the money is going, and to do our research as students about how this money can be most effective in our giving, in our charitable giving? The example that was given by one of the founders was guide dogs for the blind. Now look, I'm not saying you shouldn't give to guide dogs to the blind, but it costs something like £20,000 to really train up and give and fund a guide dog to help a blind person. Wonderful, really. But £20,000 could save the sight of hundreds and hundreds of people if it were given to a different charity working in a different way with blind people and with the causes of blindness. Do you see? Again, it's not about right and wrong, but these students said, we want to make our giving effective, and we want to do the research, and we want to get the best return on investment, to use the jargon. And then they went a step further. OK, I can give this money now to the poor, to charity, to an effective institution, but what if I made more money out of this now, and then gave my earnings and my investments next year or in 10 years? Would that be even more effective? Yes. So they set themselves to not give now, but to maximise their earnings and to go into the top earning jobs possible, not for themselves, but so that they could give it away at the right time. Now, finally, what's the danger? Yeah? You get the £1 million job that you've always dreamt of. You're 29, 35, 40, and you've forgotten these dreams you had when you were an undergraduate, and you're trapped back at the beginning in the spiritual danger of riches. So these students in the effective altruism movement, they're not stupid. They know this is what happens to rich people. So they said, here, as undergraduates and graduates, we're going to go on this plan, make lots of money, but now we are going to make a vow, a promise to each other, to tithe 20% of our earnings for the rest of our lives to good causes and charities where the effects of the charitable giving is proven and maximised. Do you see, it's a real vision, and how it reflects something profoundly Christian, even though I don't think the roots of this were Christian. It's about generosity and giving. It's about knowing the spiritual dangers of riches, and it's about having the zeal to make a difference and to be generous, but the practical framework and structures and commitments that will make that generosity last. It's only one way of giving. It's only one way of thinking about riches and poverty and what our vocation is. But it's inspired me, and I offer it to you as an encouragement. Woe to you who are rich, the dangers of riches, but the opportunities of wealth and the gifts we have been given, and the call to use them and give them generously.